He thought he had married a quiet, ordinary woman with no family to protect her. So when the argument exploded in the grand marble hallway, he shoved her to the cold floor without hesitation. But the moment she fell, the butler froze, the security guards exchanged terrified glances, and the family lawyer slowly whispered, "Mr. Callahan, do you even know whose house you're standing in?" Rowan Callahan had always thought he knew everything about his wife Serafina Vale, but he couldn't have been more wrong. He believed her quiet nature meant she had no strength, no ambition, and no family to protect her. He often made decisions for her, believing he was doing her a favor, while secretly looking down on her for being ordinary. He would comment on her simple clothes, her soft-spoken voice, and the way she never demanded attention at parties or social gatherings. Rowan thought it was gratitude she owed him, yet he never stopped to notice the subtle intelligence in her eyes or the way she observed every detail around her. At home, Rowan's arrogance grew. He controlled conversations, financial decisions, and even her friendships, thinking she needed guidance. He mocked her lack of interest in flashy things, calling it dullness, never realizing it was a choice. He dismissed her opinions, believing she lacked the knowledge to challenge him. Every small act of independence she tried to show was quietly shut down by him, leaving Serafina to appear compliant and meek. But Serafina was far from weak. She had patience, awareness, and a sharp mind honed from years of observing life carefully. She had learned when to speak and when to remain silent, saving her strength for the right moment. Rowan saw only the surface, never the depth beneath it. He didn't notice the way she managed small details at home, or the subtle ways she influenced decisions without him realizing. While he laughed at what he thought was her simplicity, she quietly built a reserve of knowledge and strategy that Rowan could never see. His ignorance was his blind spot, and it would soon become the reason he underestimated her completely. Serafina's restraint was not weakness, it was preparation, and Rowan had no idea the storm he had ignored was quietly forming. Rowan found the envelope on his desk one late afternoon, heavy and embossed with gold lettering. It was an invitation to a private gathering at a coastal estate that everyone whispered about in elite circles. Rumors said the mansion was worth more than $60 billion, and only the wealthiest and most influential were ever invited. Rowan's mind immediately jumped to business deals, potential investments, and the chance to impress people who could elevate his status. He didn't think twice about the personal side of it. He only saw opportunity. Serafina, however, looked at the invitation with a calm curiosity that unsettled him. She suggested they attend together, her tone casual but her eyes steady. Rowan laughed at the idea. He teased her, asking if she had ever been near such wealth before, or if she even understood the world she was about to step into. To him, her suggestion was naive, almost comical. He assumed her interest was just idle curiosity, nothing more. But there was something in her voice, a quiet confidence he hadn't heard before. She didn't plead, argue, or beg. She simply insisted, making it clear she would attend no matter what. Rowan felt a strange tug of annoyance mixed with curiosity. Why did she seem so certain? Why did she seem unafraid? He had grown used to controlling situations, but her insistence sparked a tiny, uneasy awareness that maybe she saw more than he realized. By the time they left for the estate, Rowan still believed he was leading the way, showing Serafina a world she had never known. He had no idea that this invitation wasn't just a social call or business opportunity. It was the first step in revealing secrets he had never guessed existed, secrets that would turn everything he thought he knew upside down. Serafina's quiet determination marked the beginning of a night that would change their lives forever. The moment Rowan and Serafina arrived, he felt as if he had stepped into a different world. The mansion rose before them like a palace, its white stone walls gleaming in the afternoon sun. Tall crystal chandeliers hung from the ceilings inside, reflecting light across polished floors. Expensive paintings adorned every wall, and sculptures filled the wide hallways. Outside, perfectly manicured gardens stretched for acres, fountains sparkling in the sunlight. Rowan's jaw dropped. He had never seen anything like it in his life. As they walked through the grand entrance, Rowan noticed something odd. Several staff members paused to look at Serafina. Some gave small nods, others a slight bow. Their eyes carried a recognition that made Rowan frown. He glanced at her, expecting a smile or an explanation, But Serafina moved gracefully as if she belonged. She didn't rush, she didn't act surprised. She simply walked beside him calm and composed. Rowan shook his head and told himself it was coincidence. Maybe she had met someone from the staff before, or perhaps they mistook her for someone else. Still, a small unease settled in his chest. These people weren't just polite, they were careful, respectful in a way that suggested more than ordinary courtesy. He couldn't understand why. As they entered the main hall, Serafina's steps were steady, her gaze sweeping the room as if she already knew its rhythm. Rowan found it odd that she didn't gasp or stare like he did. There was no awe, no hesitation. Instead, she moved with familiarity, almost ownership, and a quiet confidence that unnerved him. Rowan dismissed it again, thinking he was imagining things, but deep down, a seed of doubt began to form. Something about this mansion, these staff, and Serafina herself didn't fit the story he had always told himself about his wife. As the guests gathered in the grand ballroom, Rowan felt a surge of pride. He saw himself as the center of attention, the man who had tamed his quiet, simple wife. Turning to Serafina, he began pointing out flaws in her dress, her posture, and even the way she spoke. Every word was meant to highlight his own superiority, to show the wealthy crowd that he was the one in control. He laughed lightly, as if everyone should join him in mocking her. Serafina listened without interruption. Her face remained calm, almost unreadable, but there was a distance in her eyes, a quiet fire that Rowan failed to notice. She did not argue, did not cry, and did not beg for respect. She simply endured, keeping her composure while Rowan embarrassed her in front of people he wanted to impress. Around them, the staff exchanged uncomfortable glances. The head butler's jaw tightened, and a few of the attendants subtly moved closer, ready to intervene if needed. They were loyal but not to Rowan. They were protective in ways he couldn't understand. Their unease was clear, their respect for Serafina unmistakable. The guests shifted uncomfortably as Rowan continued his tirade. Some whispered quietly, glancing at Serafina with concern. Rowan, however, was too absorbed in his own ego to notice. He was proud of his supposed dominance, blind to the fact that his actions only revealed his cruelty. Through it all, Serafina stood still, letting the humiliation wash over her without a single visible reaction. But inside she was calculating, observing and remembering every slight, every mocking word. Rowan thought he had the upper hand, that he had shown everyone who was in charge. What he didn't realize was that this moment, meant to display his power, was quietly planting the seeds of a reckoning he could never escape. The conversation had been tense all evening, but Rowan believed he was still in control. They were discussing the history of the estate, and Serafina, calmly and clearly, corrected a small but important detail he had stated incorrectly. Her voice was steady, her tone polite but firm. Rowan's face twisted in disbelief. How dare she challenge him in front of so many influential guests? Anger flared inside him like a sudden fire. He felt his pride wounded and his image threatened. Without thinking, he accused her of trying to embarrass him, raising his voice sharply so everyone in the room could hear. Guests froze, their polite conversations fading into awkward silence as the tension mounted. Rowan's hand shot out, gripping her arm roughly, and before she could react, he shoved her toward the cold, polished marble floor. Serafina fell with a quiet thud, her eyes locking on his with a mixture of shock and a calm that unnerved him. The room went completely silent. Crystal glasses paused midair, murmurs died instantly, and the staff stopped in their tracks. Every eye in the grand hall turned toward them. Rowan's heart raced, not with fear but with anger, thinking he had finally asserted dominance. Yet, as he looked around, he saw something he didn't expect. The staff and several guests were frozen, their expressions a mix of horror and disbelief. Rowan finally realized the gravity of what he had done, but his pride wouldn't allow him to apologize. Serafina remained on the floor, still composed despite the sudden violence. Her calmness struck him harder than any words could. In that silent, frozen moment, something shifted. Rowan had intended to humiliate and control, but instead, he had revealed his own true character to everyone in the room. And Serafina, even on the floor, had not lost her dignity. The moment Serafina hit the marble floor, Rowan expected someone to step in on his side, to reassure him that he was right, to show loyalty to him. Instead, the opposite happened. The staff moved quickly toward Serafina, their concern immediate and intense. They knelt beside her, helping her rise and checking to make sure she wasn't hurt, their eyes sharp and alert. Rowan felt a jolt of confusion. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. The head butler's face was tight with anger. His jaw clenched so hard it looked painful. He didn't glare at Serafina or apologize for her fall. He glared at Rowan. Every subtle movement, every step Rowan took was being watched closely. The security guards, normally silent and calm in their duties, positioned themselves not around Rowan, but around the space between him and Serafina. Their stance was tense, deliberate, and protective, as if preparing for something Rowan could not yet see. A wave of unease washed over him. The staff's reaction was not ordinary concern. It carried weight, authority, and a silent warning. Rowan's confident facade began to crack. He realized that something about this household, and about Serafina herself, was entirely beyond his understanding. Guests whispered quietly, noticing the sudden shift in atmosphere. Rowan felt eyes on him, not filled with admiration but with disbelief. For the first time that evening, he sensed that his actions had consequences far larger than he could imagine. He had believed he was the one in power, but the staff's careful, protective response told him otherwise. As Serafina rose gracefully, supported by the staff, Rowan felt a sinking feeling in his chest. Something was very wrong, and deep down, he knew this was just the beginning of a reckoning he could not control. Before Rowan could recover from the staff's reaction, an elderly man stepped forward from the shadows of the grand hall. His presence was quiet but commanding. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his eyes fixed on Rowan with a mixture of disbelief and controlled anger. "Mr. Callahan," he began, his voice steady and calm, "I think it's time you understood the truth." Rowan straightened, trying to maintain his usual arrogance, but something in the man's tone made him uneasy. The lawyer introduced himself as Alistair Crowe, the Vale family's trusted legal advisor for decades. He looked around the room once, making sure all eyes were on Rowan before continuing. Then with a measured pause he delivered words that would shatter everything Rowan thought he knew. The mansion, the fortune, the empire. It all belonged to the Vale family. And Serafina, the woman he had belittled and humiliated, was the sole heir. Time seemed to freeze for Rowan. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp, cutting through his arrogance. His mind raced, trying to find a mistake, some misunderstanding, but there was none. Every detail, every glance of the staff, every respectful nod Serafina had received now made sense. He had been blind, arrogant, and cruel, and it had led him into the lion's den of his own undoing. Serafina remained calm, standing beside him, her posture regal, her eyes steady. She didn't gloat, didn't smile. She simply let the truth settle, letting Rowan face the full weight of his ignorance. The guests whispered, the staff relaxed slightly, and Rowan's confidence crumbled entirely. For the first time he understood that nothing he had built, nothing he had controlled mattered in this house. The power he thought he held was an illusion, and the woman he had underestimated had been in control all along. Rowan was trapped in the consequences of his arrogance, and there was no escaping the reality Alistair Crowe had just revealed. Rowan stood frozen, his mind spinning. The truth hit him like a thunderbolt, shattering every bit of confidence he had carried for years. Suddenly, all the memories he had of Serafina seemed different. Her quiet patience at parties, the way she spoke with such calm authority, the way strangers instinctively treated her with respect. Everything he had dismissed as simplicity or meekness now appeared as evidence of her true power. He replayed moments he had long forgotten. The way she had corrected him gently during arguments, the way she had subtly guided decisions at home without drawing attention, even the little gestures that once seemed ordinary. All of it was deliberate, intelligent, and precise. Rowan realized with growing horror that he had been blind, seeing only what he wanted. A quiet, controllable wife. Anger and fear mixed in his chest. He had spent years mocking her, belittling her, and showing off in front of others while humiliating the woman who, it turned out, held a fortune far beyond his imagination. Every cruel word he had spoken, every dismissive action, now felt like chains tightening around him. The mansion, the staff, the respect she commanded, they were all hers, and he had no claim to any of it. Rowan's ego, once so unshakable, crumbled completely. He saw the truth clearly now. He had been arrogant, cruel, and foolish. The realization that Serafina had been far more capable and powerful than he could ever imagine made his stomach turn. He had underestimated her. And in doing so, he had walked straight into a situation he could not control. For the first time, Rowan felt real fear. He understood that the life he had built around his pride and illusions was fragile. And he also knew that Serafina, calm and composed, was fully aware of every mistake he had made. And she had the power to make him pay for each one. Serafina slowly pushed herself up from the marble floor, her movements graceful and composed. She straightened her posture, looked at Rowan and spoke, not with anger, but with a calm, steady disappointment that cut deeper than any shouting could. Her voice was measured, each word deliberate, carrying the weight of truth and quiet authority. She told him that she had kept her identity a secret all these years for a reason. She had wanted a life built on love, trust, and honesty, not on money, power, or status. Her goal had never been to deceive him maliciously, but to see if someone could truly value her for who she was, not for the fortune she would one day inherit. Rowan had seemed to fit that hope at first, but his cruelty, arrogance, and constant belittling had revealed his true character. Serafina's gaze did not waver. She calmly reminded him that respect, trust, and dignity were not things to be demanded, they were earned. Rowan's actions had shown that he was unworthy of both her trust and the life she had tried to share with him. Every insult, every act of humiliation, every careless word had built a clear picture of the man he really was. The staff and guests watched silently, sensing the power shift in the room. Serafina's calm authority was undeniable. Her presence filled the space with control and dignity, and Rowan felt smaller with each passing second. He realized that his attempts to dominate her, to showcase himself as superior, had backfired completely. As she finished speaking, she did not seek revenge yet, but her words carried a warning. Rowan could feel the weight of his mistakes pressing down on him. For the first time, he understood that Serafina's silence had been her strength, and his cruelty had given her the clarity and power to act when the moment came. Within days of the revelation, Rowan began to notice changes he hadn't anticipated. Serafina had quietly been preparing for this moment long before he ever realized it. Contracts he thought were secure were suddenly voided, partnerships he relied on were carefully dissolved, and investments he had assumed were untouchable were quietly reclaimed under her authority. Rowan watched helplessly as one by one, the advantages he had flaunted for years began to vanish. Accounts he controlled were frozen, business deals collapsed without explanation, and allies who had once supported him started keeping their distance. Serafina's actions were precise, deliberate, and unstoppable. Every move she made was calculated to show him the consequences of his arrogance. Yet she did it without rage or drama. Her power was quiet, effective, and absolute. He tried to fight back, reaching out to contacts and attempting to regain control, but every attempt failed. The legal leverage Serafina had secured was airtight. She had anticipated his moves, prepared countermeasures, and executed her plan with patience. Rowan felt the walls closing in, the reality of his situation pressing down like a weight he could not lift. The staff, who had once served him politely, now followed Serafina's directions with unwavering loyalty. They executed her instructions flawlessly, reinforcing the fact that Rowan no longer held any real power in the house or in her life. For the first time, Rowan understood that his years of pride, control, and cruelty had left him vulnerable. Serafina had used his underestimation of her to her advantage, and every privilege he had assumed was his by right of marriage was now gone. Her revenge was methodical, controlled, and utterly devastating. Rowan had been humbled completely, and the woman he had tried to dominate had become the one holding all the cards. Word spread fast. Once Rowan's allies learned the truth about the Veiled Dynasty, they began to distance themselves. Calls went unanswered, meetings were cancelled, and partners quietly withdrew from deals he had once thought secure. The network of influence he had relied on for years crumbled almost overnight. Whispers about his cruelty and arrogance grew louder. People who had once admired him for his wealth and confidence now questioned his character. Stories of how he humiliated Serafina, how he had pushed her in front of guests, and how he had underestimated her spread through social and business circles. Rowan's reputation, built on pride and control, collapsed under the weight of his own actions. Meanwhile, Serafina moved with steady determination. She resumed leadership of the Vale family empire, navigating the complex businesses with calm authority. Every decision she made reinforced her strength, intelligence, and capability. The staff and advisors who had once been cautious now followed her lead with complete trust and respect. Her presence alone commanded loyalty and admiration. Rowan watched helplessly as she reclaimed control over every aspect of the empire. The fortune, the properties, the influence, all belonged firmly in her hands. He realized that no amount of charm or arrogance could undo the years he had spent belittling the woman who now stood taller than he ever could. Serafina's power was not loud or aggressive. It was steady, calculated, and undeniable. People admired her not just for her wealth, but for her strength, intelligence, and fairness. Rowan, on the other hand, was left isolated, a shadow of the man he had believed himself to be. The tables had turned completely. The woman he had tried to control had become the center of everything, and he was powerless to change it. Rowan found himself standing at the gates of the mansion he had once entered with pride and arrogance. The memory of that night still haunted him. The humiliation, the truth, and the sudden collapse of everything he thought he controlled. He paused, taking in the sight of the estate, now even more alive with activity, yet serene and orderly under Serafina's guidance. Inside, Serafina moved through the halls with quiet authority, overseeing every detail with precision. She met with advisors, reviewed plans, and made decisions that strengthened the Vale family legacy. There was no need for displays of power or loud proclamations. Her confidence and intelligence spoke for themselves. The staff followed her lead effortlessly, their loyalty clear and unwavering. Every corner of the mansion reflected her presence and control. Rowan walked slowly, his steps heavy with realization. He understood, perhaps for the first time, the full meaning of what he had lost. All the dominance he had tried to impose, all the insults and arrogance, had achieved nothing but his own downfall. Respect and loyalty could not be forced, bought, or demanded. They were earned, and once destroyed, they left nothing behind. He had treated Serafina as someone beneath him, never imagining she had the power, patience, and foresight to turn the tables completely. Seeing her now, thriving and unshaken, Rowan felt the weight of his mistakes. Every business he had thought secure, every friend who had once supported him, every ounce of control he had clung to, all had slipped away because of his own cruelty and ignorance. Karma had arrived quietly but firmly. The mansion, the empire, and the respect he had sought for so long belonged entirely to Serafina. Rowan walked away humbled, finally understanding the lesson he had ignored for years. True respect cannot be demanded through power, and the loss of it can destroy everything you hold dear.
Some stories don't end, they follow you. If this one stayed in your mind, you know what to do.